At 2:18 a.m. on September 12th, Russian radar operators near Rostov picked up faint signals coming from the west. At first, they thought it was a flock of birds. Then, the dots moved faster. Too fast. It wasn't birds. It was drones. 6 of them. Their target was a military supply train carrying fuel, ammunition, and artillery shells, enough to support an entire brigade. The train was parked near the town of Salsk, around 150 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. If it exploded, the loss would cripple local Russian operations for weeks. At 2:22 a.m., the 6 Ukrainian-made UJ-26 Beaver drones entered Russian airspace from 2 separate directions. 3 flew north toward the Orlovsky power substation. Their job was to knock out electricity to the region. The other 3 headed south, following the river and railway tracks toward the train at Salsk. The mission had been planned for 2 weeks. Satellite imagery, local informants, and intercepted communications confirmed that Russia's air defenses relied on power drawn from a single high-voltage substation. Take that out, and radars would go blind for at least 20 minutes. Just enough for the main strike team to reach the train. The drones were equipped with frequency-hopping radios, a system that changed communication channels thousands of times per second. When Russian electronic warfare systems tried to jam them, the signals simply jumped to a new channel. Operators in Ukraine's control center watched calmly as enemy interference failed to take hold. At 2:26 a.m., the northern team reached Orlovsky. The substation sat on a hill surrounded by open fields and guarded by 2 Zu-23 anti-aircraft guns. Any aircraft flying above 150 feet would be spotted immediately. So the drones came in low, hugging the ground. One climbed deliberately, exposing itself to draw the defenders' fire. The Russian gunners opened up, spraying tracers into the night sky. But while they were focused upward, 2 more drones slipped in at ground level. One struck the base of the transformer. The other hit the control room. Both detonated within seconds. The explosion ripped through the transformer, cutting power across the grid. Lights in nearby towns went dark. More importantly, radar stations feeding the Salsk region lost power. For 20 full minutes, every air defense battery in the area was effectively blind. At 2:31 a.m., the southern flight of 3 drones entered the final leg of their approach. They followed the railway lines. Metal rails and overhead wires reflected radar signals, creating clutter that confused tracking systems. Russian radar operators often ignored these readings, assuming they were routine maintenance vehicles. It was the perfect disguise. By 2:33 a.m., the drones were just 8 kilometers from Salsk. Their onboard cameras confirmed the target, a 38-car military train sitting idle near the station. Several wagons carried 152mm artillery shells. Others were full of diesel fuel. The entire train was a chain of bombs waiting for a spark. Inside the Salsk air defense control van, a Panzer S-1 crew had just started their shift change. The timing couldn't have been worse. Their radar screens were dark due to the power outage. Then, a faint heat signature appeared on their thermal display. The gunner saw a moving blur, tried to lock on, but the image flickered. He launched a missile anyway. The 57E6 missile roared off the rails. But without radar guidance, it missed completely, exploding harmlessly in the air. The Ukrainian pilots knew this was their only window. The 3 drones regrouped and began their final run from 3 directions. The first approached from the west, the second from the north, and the third from the southwest. Each pilot had synchronized their approach using onboard clocks, no radio communication, nothing that could give them away. At 2:38 a.m., the first drone dived. It hit the locomotive dead center. The explosion tore open the engine compartment, rupturing fuel and hydraulic lines. Fire erupted instantly, spreading under the wheels. 6 seconds later, the second drone came in from the opposite side. It struck a fuel tanker positioned 3 cars behind the locomotive. The warhead cut through the steel shell, spilling 60,000 liters of diesel across the tracks. Flames spread like liquid fire. The third drone came last. Its operator had the most critical job: to ensure the train couldn't be saved. He aimed for a cargo wagon identified from intelligence photos. The first explosion was contained. The second wasn't. Within seconds, sympathetic detonations began racing down the line of cars. One artillery shell triggered another, then another. The entire train became a rolling inferno. At 2:41 a.m., Russian emergency radios lit up. Crews at nearby bases reported multiple explosions, black smoke, and secondary blasts continuing for over 10 minutes. At the same time, a Su-25 pair scrambled from the Morozovsk airbase, roughly 90 kilometers away. They were tasked with intercepting any remaining drones. But by the time they arrived, there was nothing left to shoot down. The Ukrainian drones had completed their attack and self-destructed. On the ground, chaos unfolded. The Panzer crew tried to power their radar back up, but the substation strike had fried the relays. Firefighters arrived an hour later. By then, it was hopeless. The locomotive was destroyed, 12 cars were completely consumed, and ammunition detonations continued sporadically until morning. At 3:50 a.m., Russian command declared an emergency response and retaliation posture. The first visible reaction was local. Patrols sealed the railway corridor, blocking access roads and setting up improvised checkpoints. Military police arrived to cordon the area and begin a forensic sweep. At 4:20 a.m., the regional air defense network went from recovery mode back to active suppression. Morozovsk and several other bases launched fast jets, 2 Su-25 attack aircraft and a pair of Su-30SM. Their mission profile was simple: high-speed sweeps at low altitude to flush out any surviving drones. Pilots reported infrared contacts and radar clutter, but no intact were found. Most Ukrainian systems had been programmed to self-destruct after impact. Simultaneously, Russian electronic warfare units increased emissions across southern sectors. Ground-based Krasuka-class jammers and mobile EW vans in Sevastopol and Rostov region began broadcasting wideband interference on GPS and data link frequencies. Airborne EW platforms were vectored to patrol corridors, attempting to deny Ukrainian reconnaissance and block satellite uplinks. At 5 a.m., Russia escalated with long-range strikes. 2 small missile ships in the Black Sea launched a salvo of Caliber sea-launched cruise missiles aimed at what Moscow described as Ukrainian drone launch nodes and command centers inside Ukrainian territory. The Calibers were launched from coastal platforms roughly 200 to 300 kilometers offshore. Flight times to inland targets were estimated at 20 to 30 minutes. Russian briefings later claimed multiple hits on warehouses and a drone production facility, citing satellite imagery in support. At 5:30 a.m., elements of a missile brigade in the Rostov region reportedly fired Iskander tactical ballistic missiles at suspected staging areas near the border. The strikes were described in Russian social channels as pinpoint and intended to destroy logistics hubs that could support cross-border strikes. Locals reported loud detonations and shockwaves. Artillery and rocket forces were also put to work. Multiple launch rocket systems shelled known rail nodes and junctions on the Ukrainian side of the frontier. These barrages were paired with helicopter reconnaissance and spotter drones, which Russia attempted to suppress using electronic warfare and anti-drone patrols. Domestically, Moscow took information action measures. State media amplified claims of a thwarted large-scale drone swarm and announced the interception of dozens of UAV over the preceding 24 hours. By mid-morning, air and naval patrols had been intensified across the southern flank. Additional patrol boats and a corvette were seen repositioning off the coast. Supply convoys were rerouted, and high-value rail movements were postponed indefinitely. Commanders ordered redundant power routing and mobile substation detachments to harden critical nodes. Russia's retaliation showed how deeply the strike had cut, but it changed nothing. The train was gone, the grid was down, and the message was clear: nowhere was safe anymore. If you want to see more, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There's a lot more coming.